Welcome, one and all, throughout time and space for this episode of Weebs on the Weekends, the podcast where we break down the anime news highlights of the week and give a retrospective look on an anime that premiered 10 years ago. Today's episode, we will cover the third week of October 2022, in which we will continue our voice actor spotlights on Yuki Kaiji, where he takes on the role of Satoru Asahina in the 2012 anime franchise Shinsekai Yori, also known as FromtheNewWorld. We will also give our thoughts on whether this franchise deserves to be resurrected or it needs to be remained buried, in which we will call it rebury. And my name is Sam Martinez. I am a part-time weeb, full-time automail mechanic, and with me as always is my co-host Jay Johnson, part-time weeb, full-time Daigaku Kansara. Now, Jay.
All right, so I will talk about From a New World because I've always... Oh, let me say this before, that Timecodes and descriptions are going to be in the doobly-doo below because this is going up on YouTube, where is basically our second home, because Sam does a lot of wonderful memeage and just makes it such a visually enjoyable show to listen to our soothing voice, but also to laugh and get a little bit more information than what we can actually speak about. So yes, please follow us on our audio platforms if you want to hear about the weekly news. But we're talking about From a New World because it's your pick, Sam, and I've always only seen this through its visuals of a couple of kids on that, I guess it's known as the Tanjiro Soul world of the reflective sand, but it comes up so often in a lot of other animes and mangas, like Tokyo Ghoul has it and a lot of other places. But yeah, I've only known this as kids in school outfits on a crystal lake, and that's it.
Okay, yeah, so this is your first exposure to it, and now I can see why it's been so jarring to you. Pretty much to sum up or at least like the premise of the first three episodes, we follow a main character known as, what's her name? Her name is Saki Watanabe, where she learns that she has psychic powers. And then she goes through a ritual and she's sent off to their equivalent for Xavier School for Gifted Children. But then as she's going on through her daily life with her friends, as they're honing in on their special abilities and trying to learn more about their world, we as the audience or as the viewer begin to realize that there is a sinister undertone to all that is going on. There are various rumors of various creatures, such as a black cat of calamity or a spectral bull that are talked about the children, but then that are talked about within the children's friend group, and then we see instances of adults sort of confirming it or confirming the various beings along those levels that actually exist. So we as the audience are trying to figure out and understand this quote unquote new world as the kids are growing up in this world. The studio for this work is A1 Pictures. The original source for this work was a light novel series, and very much like what Jay had mentioned earlier, the genre for this series are drama, horror, mystery, sci-fi, and supernatural. It has a very psychological theme, and it is known rated R to 17 plus for its violence and profanity. And this work can be streamed on Crunchyroll and High Dive. And to sort of talk a little bit about the characters, well, I just want to mention this regarding the characters before I had forgotten. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on the characters. I know, like, there's probably not a whole lot. At least, like for me, my perspective is, they're still young and they're still trying to figure out what they want. But it's not like their characters had really stood out a whole lot outside of them trying to understand the mystery of their world. Was there anything that's jumped out to you in regards to their characters, Jay?
That is like the kind of weaker side of examining going from story to
Yeah.
character and animation. If you're just looking at the characters, there's nothing really to really get attached to. You kind of get a sentiment that there is more intrigue in the world itself, and that you as a audience member is viewing this as a child. And I think you mentioned this before, but there's a lot of similarities to, at least in these first 3 episodes that I've watched, is that Promise Neverland, that
Yes.
suspenseful atmosphere in the characters. It's like, yeah, it's like you kind of feel disturbed in a way. You feel, I think you even said it's sinister. You feel like
Hmm.
not focusing on the characters is very intentional, that the world is supposed to be this very unknown, scary place, and the characters take a very backseat to it, or a backseat to it. And even speaking to Yuji Kaiji's voice performance, like he's mostly known for being Aaron Yeager, which will come out next year for its 10-year
Hmm.
anniversary. But yeah, like his performance is just like muted and mellow. It's just like nothing outstanding with anyone really. And like when you show off their powers, or like, oh, they're just gifted kids, they all have the same type of ability. It's all like telekinesis, essentially. It's all something cognitive. So,
Hmm.
and when they make friends, they're talking about very casual things. They're not really talking about the world itself yet. They're just kids, but they're the world around them that they're talking in feels very unwelcoming to them as kids. So it's like a lot of it is just sensory and emotion, that you're like, oh, these kids don't know what's going on. And that's when it gets you. That's when whatever is behind the corner or under the bed gets you. So I think it works well that the characters are kind of not blank slates, but in the same way as you don't really know the kids in Friday the 13th, or is that where
Hmm.
Freddy Krueger is? Friday the 13th?
No, no, no. That's
Uh,
Nightmare on Elm Street.
oh, Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah, like so the characters are just like archetypes. They're like cardboard cutouts with some kind of depth to them, but
Hmm.
something sinister is at foot. So when they start going, you still feel bad for the kids, but yeah, the characters do take a backseat to the animation and to the world.
Yes. No, no, definitely. And as you said, like in most cases, like it wouldn't be good, but like in this case, it works out well, as you said, because the kids are a blank slate. I like that they do that because you learn with the kids about the world and it's natural. It's not like you're getting this exposition dump. You are on this mysterious journey along with the kids. And because you're not a kid, like you are more worried for the kids than the kids are for themselves. So like it sort of like adds like that sort of like layer of psychological thriller as well. And just to go like to talk a little bit about the animation, because I know we definitely want to get into the story. I so wanted to just save the story for last so that we can sit and divulge on that a little bit. But in regards to the animation, as you had mentioned earlier, we've seen several other A1 Pictures anime, more recently Magi. And I wanted to pick your brain on what different did you see any differences between the two animation styles? Do you think that they were comparable to each other?
Oh wow, that is like comparable. That's funny because Magi is so shonen it hurts your eyes, and this is so beautiful. And I kind of talked about this. It feels like the movie that we reviewed this year. I hope it was this year, but it's the Fireflies in the Forest, the Hotoro I no Mori,
Hmm.
and just so much detail. It hurts. That just hurts. That goes into like perspective, camera movement, cinematography, background design, how this kids move, and just just cell by cell and frame by frame, you just want to stop and just look at it. So it's just a work of art. And I say that in a very odd way because the world is very dull. It's like
Yeah.
something has drained the life out of the world, but everyone's so happy go lucky, kind of. But and I think again it just plays into why the story is the strongest part of the first 3 episodes particularly because the world is so beautiful, or is it? kind of thing. And again, like looking at how a studio does their work, they bring in artists that are proficient in a certain atmospheric kind of development to match the theme. So yeah, Magi was just shown in poppy colors and highlights and neon colors and brightness. This is just go see this just for the visuals. You don't even have to listen to the story or read the dialogue. It's just visually stunning.
No, I'm glad that you gave the description that you did because I know that like as I'm watching this, very much like you said, like there is a stark contrast between this and Magi. At first, I'm like, this feels so old. It's like one of the things that we used to talk about earlier in the show is like whether or not the animation holds up. And I'm sitting here, I'm watching this, I'm like, this feels like it's older than 10 years, and I'm like, why is that? It came out the same year as Magi, and we saw like how bright and poppy the colors were, how smooth the animation was, and the animation is very smooth in this too, but it has to deal with what you said as well about like the tones, the somberness of everything, how everything is dull. As I really liked what your comparison was, how it seemed as though like the life from the world itself was sucked away, right? Like, and it just adds to the story itself alongside that. So it's very much intentional to the story that they want to tell. And I guess the question or the quick follow up question would be, I guess, like in terms of having somebody again, like the biggest comparison that I had is like watching Magi today compared to like 10 years ago. Like it seemed like it was within the time, like nothing really changed. But with this, it's more of a directional, it's intentional that it's supposed to look dull and it's supposed to look like this. Do you feel as though that's going to bother somebody, say, a few years from now, like when they're sitting and they're trying to watch this? Do you feel like that they're going to be able to grab onto that, or do you think that they will think that this work is too old that it won't be worth their time?
Oh, for sure. That's a great point because while you were talking, I was like, oh, that's probably the problem people have with Grave of the Fireflies is that
Hmm.
that's one of the first Studio Ghibli productions. But if you compare that to what they did recently with like The Wind Rises, like 30 years difference between those two releases, it's like Grave of the Fireflies is like one of the greatest anime movies ever created, and people
Yeah.
get desensitized or they just get used to a certain medium and animation style. And we kind of talk about that with the Oscars that they think animation equals childishness when there's like horrific animes out there, like as I say, Devilman Crybaby. But
Doro
yeah,
Hedoro.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah, even that, yeah, lizard eating head guy. But yeah, it's very much in that vein of they perfect it or they like kind of round it at the edges of a very old art style like from the 80s and yeah 80s and early 90s I would say. So yeah, people are not going to be adherent to watch this because they're like, oh, this old anime, this looks like something my grandpa used to watch. But it's kind of just one of those downsides to animations that perfect an art style and it's not the modern sensibilities towards an art style.
I can see where the intrigue would be, like you said, it's like, oh, this is somebody that can see like the older generation watch. Like maybe there's it'll have like that sort of interesting thing to it where it's like maybe it's something good. Like I know I got that talking about like what we had said earlier in the news, how I was watching how I would catch glimpses of Yu Yu Hakusho and Inuyasha in the morning before school. Is like because it had like that older distinct art style, but yet it was still being played on the TV. Like it got me interested. It's like maybe there's something about this show that I don't know about yet. It's like there's got to be some reason why it's on the TV, like that sort of thing. But now we can talk a little bit about the story aspect. And as we had mentioned earlier, like it seems like everything has been written for and trying to support the story that is Shinsekai Yori. And I know you have a lot of thoughts. Was there anything in particular that you wanted to address first?
Well, with the 3 episode test specifically, because you're kind of looking at the first episode always sets up the backstory. It sets
Mhm.
up the characters and sets up usually like the core of the mystery or the premise, like what's going to carry you through with the episodes. And just comparing this to like what it reminded me of after watching the three episodes was Promise Neverland, which we mentioned before, but also last year's Tunnelless Nana, which was about a powerless girl, if you want to call her quirkless, going to a high school of super gifted kids with S rank abilities, and her as a non, powered person going into the school to kill kids. So I want to talk about the killing kids in this show part,
Yes.
and maybe not killing kids, but making kids disappear. So let's start there. How would you like to talk about disappearing kids?
Oh my goodness! Like, cause episode 2, it's literally called "The Disappearing Kids," and it's just because, like, also like it just goes into like that sort of sinister nature, and the show does it very well because at the beginning of every episode, you sort of get this flashback of timeline of the world. Right in the beginning of the first episode, we get a flashback to something that we would consider as modern day, where towers, skyscrapers, things like that. And we see a kid sort of bust out of the car that he was in, and something's obviously wrong. But it seems like he's having an Akira, or I'm trying to remember the movie that he's having an Akira or a Chronicles moment, right? Where like he's just gifted with telekinesis and just basically wrecks everything, or at least it's implied that he is, because it cuts straight to Saki's world. And then in episode 2, we get a flashback to 1,000 years before her time, where we follow this emperor that's just vied into power and is abusing his people, and is saying that he'll kill the first 100 people that stop clapping for his coronation. And you see people burn in the audience. And you also get something else about like an assassination attempt in episode 3. But just the point that I'm trying to make is like you get this flashback, right, of sort of akin to what we said in One Piece, where it's like there is this gap, where like this sort of void timeline, where we're intrigued to figure out like what happened to that world, what's going on in that world. And we begin to learn a little bit of some of the rules, where Saki, her parents are trying to reassure her that her getting her powers so late, it's okay. But like they slip up and they say something that causes her to be curiously concerned, where it's like something along the lines of like, oh, it was very fortunate, or something along those lines, where it's like that she had gotten her powers. And she's like, what do you mean by that? And the parents quickly try to brush it off, and then we see her overhearing them saying that, like hearing her mother say, it's like, sorry, we see her flashback to a time where she didn't have her powers, and she overhears her parents um sort of talking to each other. And the mother's like, I don't want to lose any more kids, right? Whereas up until that point, we're assumed that Saki is an only child. And then we even see her in her new school. There is a sixth member in the core group that was mentioned earlier, where she's not as strong as the others. As you said, they're doing these Esper tasks where they're lifting things, they're making art out of sand, and she's not doing as good of a job. And then she just stops showing up to school one day. The kids thought that she was sick, but then they never talk about her again. And then they have that competition where they are using their powers to move this boulder from one end to another, and they run into a team that sort of cheats, where apparently one big rule in that society is that you can't use your powers on something or against somebody else. Like, say if I'm levitating a pencil, you're not supposed to use your power to try to make my pencil go down, because the clash of powers would do something to the reality around us. There is suspicion that there was a kid that was cheating in this competition, making their team win the tournament or progress as far in the tournament as they did. And the kids were a little upset that the team wasn't called out for cheating, but guess what happened the next day? Turns out the kid that was suspected for cheating was quote unquote sick, and he never showed up again. So it's just like it's just sort of weird, because you begin to learn that in this society, it's like people who don't have powers, they're sort of taken care of, quote unquote. And then, like, the people who can't really play by the rules, or the people who do have powers, who are the weakest among them, they're also thrown to the farm as well. So, again, just showing like all this very sinister undertones. It's just like, what exactly are they trying to do with these kids and their powers?
Right, because we know as adults, or if you know anything about how history has progressed, it's really hard to see this because, or to watch this anime specifically, because
Mhm.
there is so much realism to that, because we know that has happened in our history. It's called social conditioning, is that
Yeah.
you take a certain, or indoctrination as well. So yeah, social conditioning and indoctrination is that you set parameters, and I think they mentioned it as like the code of values or the code of conduct essentially for
Hmm.
espers, but they don't lay it out like the 10 commandments. They don't explain it to us as an audience. We assume that the kids were raised knowing the 10 commandments essentially, so they don't need to explain it in the show. But it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, that kid in the second episode should have known better, but he's a kid and he broke the rules. But unlike, our world where you explain to the kid what they did wrong, and you not sympathize but empathize with them that they're still learning. Here, they just, I don't know,
They get snatched.
they get snatched and turned into meat or something and then served back to the kids. I don't know. But there is so many sci-fi stories that we know. Equilibrium comes to mind, and as well as Psychopaths. The idea that, yeah,
Really? Okay.
your abilities are at a certain parameters and you're allowed to operate inside those parameters. But seeing this from a kid perspective is what's really, I guess, crushing about it, and what makes it such a cautionary tale almost, it feels, because like you said, they go through flashbacks, and so how humanity got to this position, kind of explain it, kind of briefly. But then also
Hmm.
you have like the narration going on a little bit from, I'm assuming, did it stay that was adult Saki doing the narration?
I need to go back and watch it, because like I said, there were so many things, because like there were, like you said, there were narrations, there were flashbacks, and there were even stories that the kids had to read when they were in class, and that sort of served as you said, cautionary tales. But then again, like with all the stuff that we've seen, it's like, is it for real, or is it really just a cautionary tale? But like, just to go back to your point about the narration, I honestly, I had forgotten that there was a narration that was going on, so I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, it's
If
very
yeah,
brief. It's very sparse because, again, I think it's one of those things of, we're looking through Saki's memories,
yeah.
and like her, how she saw it as a child. I think we talked about this before. I can't believe, was it the other weirdly dystopian future with elves that kind of did something similar to this?
Oh, humanity has declined.
Yes, humanity has declined. And, this has so much similarities to that. Weird that we're talking about these two dystopian futures with psychic powers and powerful creatures going on, because we haven't even mentioned the queen rats yet in the second episode. So, did that strike you as a odd introduction at all?
Oh, just like the random mutant rats that they run into on along the water.
Yes, yeah.
I would say, like, again, like we're experiencing the world along with the kids, and like as you said before, like the kids, like they do, like you said, they know like the Ten Commandments, right? So like they know that there are certain creatures out there. So it's like they're like, oh look, it's a mutant rat, and we're like, what, mutant rats? And like it's so like we're like, okay, they knew about this, but I think this is what you were talking about with the narration, because now I remember it. Like they were there. I remember there was somebody. I can't remember if it was her or if it was like their teacher in class, but like I think it was a narration where they were saying how with the rats they treated anybody with powers. They treated them as a god. They weren't sure whether or not they didn't want the rats around the kids because they didn't know if like the loyalty that the mutant rats have, it was if it was a true loyalty or if it was a false loyalty, right? Whereas like with an adult, the rat won't be able to trick them or anything else like that. But like with a kid who is still naive, they are still susceptible. It was interesting, but it definitely did lay the groundwork for what happens. I believe in episode 4, or episode 5, with the kids. So like it seems like it was very shocking, but I mean, a splash in the pan on, like, oh hey, there are other creatures out here besides just these kids with psychic powers in this world, and so it definitely does make you more intrigued. But you said that it felt very random to you, or out of pocket.
I don't know, because technically in that second episode she also violates, like what you were saying, like she violates the code of conduct essentially by interacting with that creature or by saving it because it's in distress, of course. But then it goes into like the third episode and we get introduced to another creature at
Yes.
the end of the third episode who, you know, basically is a, I don't know if a MacGuffin is the right word, but it's basically a piece of information that leads into the fourth episode. Again,
Hmm.
not to spoil the 3 episode test that we'll give a ruling on, but I did watch the fourth episode, and boy, howdy, should the fourth episode be the third episode. Because in the third episode, they're just telling ghost stories. And again, it's like one of those things of sitting you down on a child's level. It's like, this is what kids do. They tell ghost stories. Even
Yeah.
at my school, we don't celebrate Halloweens for the bad or the impression that telling ghost stories can, infect people or infect kids specifically
Hmm.
about superstition things, even though they're in a world of magic, essentially.
Hmm.
Technology, if you want to talk about if it's technology or magic, but whatever. But yeah, it's just wild that in the first 3 episodes that it's so understated how aware the children are of the world, and it just plays into that at the end of the third episode.
I would say like I love like when you mentioned like kids being kids, because it sort of reminds me like during that the ghost story scenes we had uh Yuki Kaiji's character where he's saying his ghost story, and the kids are like, hey, that doesn't make sense, and he's like, well, you're right, and then like he changes his story and he keeps on going, and the kids are still there listening to him. So it's just pretty funny like how they did that. But I would say like it also, oh my goodness, I'm just like thinking in One Piece now, because we had mentioned One Piece, but like the character or the creature that they run into, it reminds me of a poneglyph, right? In One Piece, right? So like that random piece of information, and like for me, the creature's like, hey, I'm basically a walking, talking library. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, I want to know more about the world. So like the kid is going to, ask about the world, and that's at least like for me that would keep on going. But I hadn't seen episode 4 in a while, and I didn't want it to sort of impact my view on the first 3 episodes. So in terms of the 3 episodes and in the 3 episode test, it would be a pass for me, very much from what you had said earlier, how the characters and the animation, like the art, all of it is just supporting the story, and the story seems very, very strong, and it seems to suck you in very, very much. But Jay, did you have any other final thoughts that you wanted to give before we get your take on the 3 episode test and whether to resurrect or rebury?
Nothing left remains because it's just like one of
Mm-hmm.
those. Oh yes, well, I'm going to say what I'm going to resurrect or rebury soon, but yeah, it's just weirdly succinct with everything, and for 3 episode test to work so well here. I mean, I watched the fourth episode, so obviously it works well. But yeah, closing the third episode with like kind of introducing children to this well of knowledge, essentially, and it's again like the whole Stand By Me kind of finding a dead body behind a tree kind of adventure story is just very odd in this kind of setting.
Yeah.
So I've never seen another story like this, and I've seen like parallel stories. I think I mentioned Trigun earlier, like
Hmm.
tackling dystopian future with psychic power. Same thing with psychopaths, a power system and parameters for people to behave inside of it, as well as Promised Neverland with that shocking first episode. So I think it's doing everything right. But yeah, we can go into the 3 episode and final decision.
So, as I said before, the 3 episode test for me, I would say that it had passed. And as far as Resurrection and Rebearing, and I don't know if it's because it's just spooky month or because of how well like the story is well done. I would say I would give it a Resurrection because very much of like all that we have said before, and I'm just intrigued, and I want to finish the series now all that much more so I can see whether or not like it's truly worth that. But like from what I've seen, I definitely would give it a resurrection. But Jay, what about you? What are your thoughts on the 3 episode test and on resurrecting or reburying?
Yeah, so we always determine that like
Mm-hmm.
distinction between of what we're watching in that season, which this is the most heavily compact season of probably the last 2 years of anime I've watched. So it's really hard to say like if it's worth watching now, but I definitely want to finish it. So
Hmm.
based on that parameter of I definitely want to watch it, but I don't have time, I'm going to resurrect it because man, I think we sold it on the world, or we talked enough about the world itself. It's just so intriguing, and the flashbacks just aid in that of what
Hmm.
was the downfall of humanity, or how has going back to other anime, how has humanity declined? It's just like wow, yeah, people are just shitty, I guess, and superpowers. This is the My Hero Academia world, essentially. If everyone got Professor Xavier, how broken the X Men psychic powers are. Now, just
Yeah.
add that to, I think they mention it as like 0.1% of the population at the time.
Oh,
But if that's
yeah.
1,000 years, are now modern times, and that's what seven what that's 70,000 people or 700,000, seven
And
hundred
even
thousand people.
then,
Yeah,
like
so
think about it, like that's like each of those persons could probably have the potential to do something as terrible as like what happened in Akira, or like you said, the X-Men, right? They could potentially be an Omega level mutant, just like that alone in those numbers, like it's enough to change the entire world within a few weeks or a month or so.
yeah, and it's not something that they have to train. Well, it doesn't look like that. It looks like their powers, or at least as they were when they flash back, is that they're at full maybe potential as soon as they get them. And even
Yeah.
that small thing that you talked about with the parents' conversation is like, oh, what happened to kids that don't have powers, or what happens to kids that are too powerful, or what happens? Like it's just like, what's going on with these kids going missing? It is so
Where are they
unnerving.
going?
It's actually, if I'm going to be completely honest, it's actually a
Hmm.
little bit more terrifying than Made in Abyss, which is like one of my favorite animes of all time because
Ooh, that's some praise right there.
right, because kids in that show are going into a dangerous area and they can be eaten, they can be worse than eaten. But in
Hmm.
this, it is so disturbing just to see not even see the kid disappear. It's just like every adult just acting like they never existed. And that's just terrifying. So parents maybe don't watch it. Parents don't need to watch this. Kids don't need to watch this. If you're childless in your 30s, maybe it's for you. But I'm definitely going to resurrect it.
I would say I would also give like one other caveat too, because I remember there was one scene that I had seen later on in the series. I don't know if because you had mentioned that there was sort of a disturbing scene that happened in the show, but I know that there is something that the kids do, or they were taught to do whenever they are in a stressful situation, and it makes you feel unnerving because they're kids, and the coping mechanism that they do in order to get through the stressor of the situation. But I would say that one of the kids is self-aware enough to realize is like, hey, this isn't the thing that I need to do to get out of this situation, right? It's like this was sort of put in place to make sure that I don't necessarily fight back. And you see them come to that realization and actually try to get out of their situation. So all that is to say is that we don't know what we don't know. So just keep that in mind, even though we both had resurrected it. And as you said, like parents, maybe not watch this, or if your kids are thinking about watching this, watch this before they do, before you give them that ruling of saying that they can watch this. Um, but yeah, no. So that was our thoughts on this wonderfully psychologically thrilling franchise known as From the New World or Shinsekai Yori, where we had mentioned Yuki Kaiji's work and yeah. So, Jay, do you have any other closing thoughts or closing remarks in regards to this before we wrap things up?
I'm glad that you put this on the list because, I mean, right now, just as a 3 episode test, I'm highly impressed. And if it does wrap up in the way that I think, because again, I guess I have to give a little actually real quick that it's not based on a light novel. It's based off a novel.
Oh, novel. Okay, my apologies.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's very interesting because like the author, which oh my gosh, I can't remember his name, but has won multiple awards in horror and mystery for his novel series. So it's just like
Oh, snap.
amazing that A1 Pictures was like, oh, let's pick up this when they have done scary stuff in the past before, but the manga came out as the anime was premiering. So it's just very interesting in that this is one of those situations of a novel going directly into an anime and then the manga
Mm-hmm.
coming out sequentially with it. So it's just wild that this actually might become one of my favorite animes. So I might have to talk about that in the next year when I finish watching this.
I just looked up his name as you were talking about him. His name is Yusuke Kishi, and apparently he's also known for a series called The Crimson Labyrinth. So I may want to look into that, see if that has been made into an anime as well. But no, it's very interesting that you had said that he was known for that sort of thing. Because let's see, according to Wikipedia, it says he's a member of the Mystery Writers of Japan, and there's also a club that he's a part of, like the Hongaku Mystery Writers. So no wonder he got me with the mystery. It seems like he knows enough people to write good mysteries. So I'm very excited. I'm glad that you enjoyed it as much as you did, and I'm gonna try to be with you on this road to finish it. And we would definitely give our thoughts on whether or not, or on what we really think about the series as a whole. Again, that was our thoughts on the first 3 episodes of Shinsekai Yori, and that was a pass for both the 3 episode test and a resurrection from the both of us on this fantabulously frantically thrilling work. And I would say join us next time as we conclude our year as well as our voice actor spotlights on Yuki Kaiji as we review the magically unfamiliar yet familiar anime that's based on an English classic that is known as Blast of Tempest. Now, Jay, with that, what have you got for us today?
All right. So I haven't done any literature reviews in a while or, talked about passages and writing before. So the title of the anime that we just talked about, From a New World, actually comes from a music piece or a musical composition of classical music from, I can't remember the composer's name, but it is Symphony Number 9. This is Symphony Number 9. So even though like it has a root and that music does play out through the series, or at least in the first 3 episodes, I thought there was more parallels between A Brave New World, which is a very classical piece of literature. So this
Mm-hmm.
is my favorite passage, and probably the passage that most people have heard of if they haven't read A Brave New World. So the passage goes as such. "All right then," said the savage defiantly. "I'm claiming the right to be unhappy, not to mention the right to grow old, ugly, and impotent. The right to have syphilis and cancer. The right to have too little to eat. The right to be lousy. The right to live in constant appreciation of what may happen tomorrow. The right to catch typhoid. The right to be tortured by unspeakable pains of every kind." There was a long pause. "I claim them all," said the savage at last.